Hi, welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue with some of the basics that we covered in the first video, but we'll start looking at some of the additional features and fine points that will make things a little bit easier for you, and you can start to really get moving and cut mats quickly and efficiently. So again, we're going to start with a new mat design, and we'll start by entering the opening size. And we'll fill in the borders. We'll do a 3-inch mat all the way around. And remember, each time you hit the tab button, it will take you to the next field and it will automatically fill in the mat borders all the way around for you and show you your outside dimension. And again, this is a good place to stop for a second and compare it to your work order and make sure everything matches up. Okay, so going back up here to the opening size, you'll see that there is a swap button here. And when you click on that, you'll notice that the width and the height go back and forth. So it changes it from a vertical to a horizontal format. And this can be handy if you just accidentally get the two of them mixed up, or if you just happen to have another opening that's the same size, but it's in a different orientation. And also, most of the time you'll probably end up making the borders even all the way around. But in some cases you might want to make the bottom mat a little bit wider, let's say 3.5 inches. And again, hit tab. And the software is trying to maintain the original proportions. So it took that 1/2 inch that I added to the bottom and subtracted it from the top. Well, we want 3 inches on the top as well. So we have to go back in there and tab, and you see that it recalculates. And this is called a bottom weighted mat. It just means that the bottom border is a little bit wider than the top and the sides. That's all. And another thing that you might notice up here by the opening size is that we have a sizes tab here. And when you click on that drop down arrow, it will show you the most recent dimensions that you've entered. So if you need to go back and do the same mat over again, or if you just happen to have a size that's identical, then you could do that. And below that is standard. And these are a lot of common size, standard sizes for things like photographs and documents and things like that. For instance, this is for an 8x10, that's for a 4x6 photo, and so on. Now you'll notice that I said that that's for a 4x6 or an 8x10, but it's actually a 1/4 inch short each way. That's because when we cut a mat, normally we want to make sure that we come in at least 1/8 of an inch on the image with the matting. And with that 1/8 of an inch on each side, that subtracts 1/4 of an inch from each dimension, from the width and the height. And so that gives you the 7 3/4 instead of the full 8. And also earlier in the previous video, I went through the reverse bevel options here. Um, it would probably be worthwhile to explain why or when you would want to use a reverse bevel. First, you would use a reverse bevel on a mat that you will be putting a fillet in. Um, with a fillet, you don't want that white bevel showing against it, and also it makes it much easier to get a nice, tight, clean fit with the mat right up against the fillet. It just looks much better. The other case would be with some types of artwork, you just don't want to see a bevel. For instance, you might have an old map or document with sort of yellowed paper and very mellow colors, and that crisp white bevel against it would just be very distracting. So in that case, you could put a reverse bevel on the mats so that you don't see that. Or you might have a piece of artwork that's very, very colorful, and you're doing some really bright, colorful mats on there. and you've already got a lot of color, a lot going on, and adding in 3 bright white bevels with those colors could just end up being very distracting, just a little bit much. So again, in that case, you could do a reverse bevel and you wouldn't see the bevel, you would only see the color of the mat. So that's what that's for. And again, you can put a reverse bevel on any individual mat by clicking the check boxes, or you could automatically put it on all the mat layers by clicking that RB button right there. Okay. And once again, any place where you see a plus and minus beside a measurement, you can change that dimension by clicking it, and that will change it by a 1/16 of an inch with each click. Okay, we'll hit OK because we're good with that. And there we go. Now I just clicked on the mat itself and you saw that the boxes went away from the opening. That means that I now have this area selected, so anything that I do will be applied to that. So let's go to the properties right here. And you have some choices here. Cut the outside is automatically checked by default. And this means that when I cut my mat, the wizard will cut the opening and then it will cut the outside of the mat for me. And there are some small limitations to that, but anytime you possibly can, it's a very good idea to go ahead and use that option. Some wizard models and some cutting scenarios will require that the mat board that you're cutting be about 1.5 inches larger in order to be able to cut the outside. That does take a little bit more material, so you might want to cut that mat board blank down to size by hand on your wall-mounted cutter. But just keep in mind that when you do that, there's the potential for user error, human error. And if the board is the wrong size, the wizard doesn't know that, and it's just going to put the opening where it should be, regardless of the size. So if you do decide to do that, just be very careful. But generally, that extra time and potential for error is offsets any small savings that you might get by using a slightly smaller board. There's another option here to add the float layer. And when you do that, you'll see that there is now a third layer of mat board in here, but it's a solid piece. And this is something that you would do if you're doing a shadow box, because this gives you a solid piece of mat board to serve as a background that you can mount your objects on. Or you might have a case where you have a piece of paper-borne artwork that you might want to float with a window mat around it. And this is just a nice little time saver because it just treats it as another layer without an opening, and it will simply cut it down to size for you, which is nice. And the other option here, oval outside. Let me make a quick little change here. I'll go into more detail about all of this later, but I'm just going to change that to an oval real quick. And again, I'm going to click on the mat board itself so that the properties apply to the mat rather than the opening. And this oval outside, I don't imagine you'll use this very often, but sometimes a customer will want an oval frame or bring in an old frame that's oval, and you'll be cutting an oval opening, and you'll need it to be an oval on the outside to be able to fit in the frame. And that's how you do that. Pretty easy and a nice little feature when you need it. So that's all I've got for you right now. And that kind of shows you a few little tips and tricks that just kind of make things a little bit easier and start to show you some of the other things that the wizard can do. And in the next video, we'll start taking a look at some of these different shapes and how you might use that. So I'll see you then.